Lena had always thought she and Ben shared something rare, a love built on trust, respect, and mutual understanding. They'd been together for 5 years, and in that time, they'd grown as individuals and as partners. From their first date at a local cafe, where the sparks between them felt undeniable, to late-night conversations about their future, everything seemed perfect. They had a rhythm to their life, an unspoken understanding of how they fit into each other's world. Ben was her rock, the one person who seemed to get her like no one else did. He supported her career ambitions, cheered her on through challenges, and held her hand through every triumph. Lena did the same for him, always encouraging him to pursue his passion for art and offering him unwavering emotional support. Their life together felt like a dream, shared laughter over breakfast, the comfort of knowing they had each other's backs. There were no major arguments, no lingering doubts. Everything was exactly as it should be. Even their friends would comment on how perfect they were together. People admired their relationship, often citing them as a model couple. They had their own little world, a bubble in which nothing could touch them. And for the longest time, it seemed like that world would never change. But even in the perfect world they had created, there were small signs that all was not as it appeared. It was nothing overt, just subtle differences that Lena didn't know how to place at first. Ben had started working late more often, a little more than usual, and at times when he came home, there was an odd energy about him. He'd be quieter than usual, as if something was on his mind, but he'd never speak about it. They'd had their share of small disagreements, but nothing that made her feel like the foundation of their relationship was in jeopardy. She brushed it off, assuming it was work stress or perhaps just his introverted nature kicking in. Lena was busy too, throwing herself into her job, building a career she had always dreamed of. She couldn't afford to dwell on the minor changes in Ben's behavior, not when she was so focused on her own growth. They still spent time together, still made plans, and still talked about their future. Yet, in the back of her mind, there was a quiet nagging feeling that something wasn't quite right. She dismissed it, telling herself it was just stress from balancing work and a relationship, but the feeling lingered. One evening, while Ben was working late again, Lena found herself scrolling through her phone, half watching a show she had put on for background noise. That's when she noticed it. A notification from a messaging app flashed on her screen, Ben's phone, lying face down on the counter where he usually kept it. The notification wasn't meant for her eyes, but something in Lena's gut told her to look. It wasn't like her to snoop, but in that moment, an overwhelming sense of curiosity overtook her. The message was from a woman, someone Lena didn't recognize. It was brief, but enough to make Lena freeze in place. "I miss you. Can't wait to see you again." The words were innocuous on their own, but the context, the intimacy of the message, sent a shockwave through her body. A cold shiver ran down her spine as she read it again, and then again, each time feeling the ground beneath her shift. She couldn't stop her heart from racing, couldn't suppress the voice in her head that screamed at her to confront him immediately. Yet, something held her back. She stared at the phone, unsure of what to do, as her mind raced to make sense of what she had just read. This wasn't just a text message, it was a clue, a small piece of a much larger puzzle. Lena felt her stomach churn with confusion and fear, her thoughts spiraling. She had no concrete proof, just this one message. Could it be a mistake? Could there be an explanation? But no matter how many times she tried to rationalize it, the knot in her stomach tightened. She had always trusted Ben, always believed that their bond was unbreakable. Now that trust seemed to be cracking piece by piece. She put the phone down, her mind reeling. The quietness of the apartment suddenly felt suffocating. She wondered if she was overreacting, if she was just reading too much into something trivial. But deep down, she knew. The pit in her stomach told her that this wasn't just a random text. It was a sign. Ben had been distant, avoiding her in subtle ways. The late nights, the change in his demeanor, all of it now seemed connected to this message. Lena wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. She needed to be sure. So, she sat there, staring at the phone, torn between the need for answers and the desire to pretend everything was fine. But nothing would ever be the same again. She could feel it. In her heart, she knew her world was on the verge of shattering. What had once seemed like the perfect relationship was now tainted, and the truth, whatever it was out of her reach, just beyond the horizon of her understanding. Lena's mind was a whirlwind of disbelief and confusion as she sat on the couch, staring at Ben's phone. The message had been simple, but the implications were enormous. "I miss you. Can't wait to see you again." Every word seemed to echo in her mind. It was impossible to ignore the feeling that something was deeply wrong, yet she couldn't fathom the possibility that Ben, the person she trusted most, could betray her. The world she had built in her mind, of unwavering love, shared dreams, and unbreakable trust, was beginning to fracture. She wanted to scream, to cry, to lash out, but all she could do was sit there, frozen in place, the weight of the message pressing down on her chest. Her hand trembled as she picked up the phone again, reading the text over and over. It felt surreal, as if she were watching someone else's life unravel. She tried to reason with herself, to find an explanation that would make sense, but the nagging voice inside her head only grew louder. She wanted to believe it was a mistake. Maybe the woman had the wrong number, or maybe it was just some casual conversation with a friend. But every ounce of her intuition told her otherwise. Lena's first instinct was to confront Ben right then and there, to demand answers. But something stopped her. She wasn't ready to face the possibility of the truth just yet. She had no concrete proof. Just a text. Could it be enough to accuse him of something as devastating as infidelity? Her chest tightened at the thought, but deep down, she knew that this moment marked a turning point. No matter how much she wanted to pretend everything was fine, she couldn't ignore the doubt that had been planted. She placed the phone down carefully, as if it might bite her if she didn't handle it with caution. The silence in the apartment seemed deafening. She was paralyzed by a mixture of fear and anger, the uncertainty of what to do next consuming her every thought. Should she confront him now? Should she wait, gather more evidence, and make sure she wasn't imagining things? But what if she was wrong? The possibility of being mistaken, of destroying everything over one message, filled her with dread. But then the thought hit her. If she didn't act now, if she didn't confront him, the doubt would continue to gnaw at her. She couldn't live in this limbo. And more than that, she couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. It wasn't just the message, it was everything. The late nights, the strange distance, the coldness that had started to settle between them. She had seen it, felt it, but she had Lena couldn't wait any longer. Her heart was pounding in her chest, her mind swirling with emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. She couldn't ignore the truth any longer. She had to confront Ben. The message still burned in her mind, each word etched into her thoughts. She had tried to delay it, to avoid this moment, but the inevitable had arrived. This wasn't just about a text. It was about everything. The distance, the late nights, the subtle changes she had sensed but didn't want to acknowledge. She had given him the benefit of the doubt for too long, and now she had no choice but to face the reality. She stood up, her hands clammy, her breathing shallow. She had no idea how this would go, no idea what Ben's response would be. But what choice did she have? The truth was out there, and it couldn't be ignored any longer. Lena took a deep breath, steadying herself, and walked to the door, her mind racing with every possible scenario. What if he denied it? What if he apologized? What if it was all just a mistake? But no matter what, she needed answers. She needed to know if the person she had loved so deeply could ever be the same person again. Ben walked through the door just as she was about to speak, his usual tired expression on his face. He gave her a quick smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Lena could see it now. The hesitation, the distance that had been there for weeks, now more obvious than ever. She couldn't hold back any longer. "Ben, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady but sharp. The words were out before she even had a chance to second-guess herself. She felt the weight of them settle between them, creating an invisible barrier she knew they couldn't cross until this was addressed. Ben furrowed his brows, his expression shifting to confusion. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice cautious. But Lena didn't need him to ask. She already knew the answer. "I found a message," she said, her voice calm but piercing. She didn't need to say more than that. The silence that followed was deafening, hanging between them like a heavy fog. Ben's face paled, the color draining from his features. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His eyes flickered nervously, and in that moment, Lena saw it. Guilt, a flicker of panic. His attempt to maintain control was slipping, and she could see him trying to put together a lie, a story to cover his tracks. "You've been lying to me, haven't you?" she continued, her voice low, controlled. "I saw the message on your phone. I miss you. Can't wait to see you again." Each word she spoke seemed to slice through the air, cutting away the remnants of the life they had built. Ben took a step back, as if the truth were a physical force pushing him away. "I can explain," he stammered, his voice shaky, but Lena could hear the desperation in his tone. She wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, but she couldn't bring herself to lose control. She had already lost so much. "Explain?" Lena's voice was sharp now, the anger she had been holding back rising to the surface. "How do you explain this? How do you explain betraying me? What were you thinking, Ben?" He opened his mouth to say something, but Lena cut him off. "No. Don't tell me it's nothing. Don't tell me I'm overreacting. I know what I saw. And I've seen the way you've been acting, distant, cold. What's going on, Ben? What are you hiding from me?" Ben ran his hand through his hair, clearly torn, as if he were trying to formulate a response that wouldn't tear everything apart. He shifted uncomfortably, and Lena could feel the walls between them growing higher with every second. He wasn't the person she had thought he was. The man who had held her hand through so many things, who had promised her the world, was now standing before her, unable to even meet her eyes. "I'm sorry, Lena," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant for this to happen. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I didn't want to hurt you." "Don't," Lena interrupted, the raw pain evident in her voice. "Don't apologize. Don't tell me this wasn't supposed to happen. Because it did. And now I'm left trying to figure out what to do with all of this." Her hands were trembling now, not with anger, but with the shock of realizing that everything she had believed about their relationship was a lie. The trust she had so freely given him was now shattered, and she didn't know how to pick up the pieces. "I didn't mean to hurt you," Ben repeated, his voice cracking. "It just happened. I got caught up in something I shouldn't have. I was stupid. I regret it, I really do." Lena's eyes narrowed. "You regret getting caught, Ben. That's what this is about. You're sorry you got caught, but you don't seem sorry for what you did." Ben opened his mouth to protest, but Lena didn't want to hear it. She was done listening to his excuses. She couldn't keep pretending like this wasn't happening. "I can't keep living like this, Ben. I can't keep pretending that everything's fine. I deserve better than this. I deserve honesty." Ben's face crumpled, as if the weight of her words had finally sunk in. His eyes were full of regret, but they no longer held the love they once did. This was the man who had promised her everything, and now it was all slipping through her fingers. Lena could feel the tears welling up, but she refused to let them fall. She couldn't break down. Not yet. Not when she was finally facing the truth. She had loved him, and she had trusted him, but in this moment, those feelings no longer mattered. What mattered now was whether or not she could ever look at him the same way again. Could she ever forgive him? Or was this the end of everything they had built? "Do you still love me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, as if the answer would break her if she heard it. Ben opened his mouth, but no words came out. The silence between them spoke louder than anything he could have said. And in that silence, Lena knew. Everything had changed. Lena stood there, her heart aching as the silence between her and Ben grew thicker. His inability to answer her simple question was like a final confirmation of everything she had feared. The weight of the truth was suffocating, and yet there was an unsettling clarity in the midst of it. Ben was standing before her, and yet he was a stranger in so many ways now. The man she had trusted, the person she thought she knew better than anyone, had betrayed her in the worst possible way. She tried to steady her breath, but the tears threatened to spill over. She wanted to break down, to crumble under the weight of everything. But she held herself together. Not for him, not for anyone, but for herself. She had to be strong, had to remember that no matter how much this hurt, she couldn't let this define her. She couldn't allow this betrayal to swallow her whole. She had already lost trust in him, but now she had to find a way to reclaim trust in herself.